Jason Malbis and William Papageorge, two Greek people that had immigrated from Greece. They were in Chicago and traveled in 1906 throughout the Midwest and southern states to look for land, to have a place to express their culture and their religion.
They were willing to give up their own individual gain for, the good of the community.
They started the nursery, dairy, turpentine, timber.
Yeah, they had a good life because they didn't want to do but eat and work.
They were all from different families but operated as one family, using their culture and their religion to form a community, a commune, if you will.
I mean, no one was better because I am over here, the cashier, and the other one is over there washing dishes.
We was all just like brothers. There wasn't no separation or nothing at Malbis.
Because they didn't marry and didn't have children, there was a little problem of people were getting older.
There was just nobody left.
So they brought in a bunch of young people.
My mama said, crippled, sick little girl. She said, my child, where you go?
I look around me and I saw what all these people put together. The dream just faded away.
Whatever they wanted to do, they accomplished. The great love they had for each other and the selfishness, this dream still goes on.
This is the home place of Jason Malbis. This is the spot that Jason was born in. And of course the home doesn't stand, but later his brother built this home in the 1920s. As Jason grew up as a young boy, they sent him to the monastery Megaspilion, which is about 20 kilometers from here.
This monastery is the oldest monastery in Greece. Its history began from 4th century. The monks were very good educated. So Jason perhaps came here for education.
He embraced the religious aspect as well and became a monk and of course stayed there.
I don't know for why he left monastery.
Whether he decided that he could do more good, a greater good, by leaving the monastery. I think he was just a real enterprising man that liked leading people, liked helping people. By the effect he had on people, must have been very charismatic. He and a group of other Greek businessmen were sent over to study commerce and industry here in the United States.
He ended up in Chicago, and at one point I think he decided that he wanted to stay in the United States to help his compatriots in their struggles.
In the late 1800s, there was a lot of movement from European countries in particular to the United States.
William Papageorge was a school teacher in Greece, interested in the improvement of the Greek people as they immigrated. They got as far as Galveston, Texas, I believe, and then started traveling east. And in Mobile, they saw an advertisement for farmland for sale.
Back in those days, you had to go by boat to Mobile. This was 1906. Because of the isolation, land was cheap here.
They saw the virgin pines and the beauty of Baldwin County, and they were probably running out of funds.
So they bought it.
The earliest Malbis members came to raw land.
Basically had to build from the wilderness.
At this specific area, there was only one farming family that they stayed with while they built their own house.
They had to fell the timber that was on the land to construct all of the buildings, and it seems that the big house was the first major construction in the third year of Jason Malbis and William Papageorge being here.
And they brought other people in. At first, none of them related.
Mr. Malbis, he sent back and get 5 or 6 at the time.
The greatest influx of Greeks came from over there during the early 1900s.
And I think he recruited a lot of Greek immigrants who were living in Chicago and encouraged them to come down and try something different.
This was a haven. This was a harbor for all of these immigrants.
They would come and then they would write to their relatives that they had a job and they could get a job for one of their friends or relatives.
Like the Papageorge family and later the Gregors and Pappases.
When we came, it so happened there were burning stumps and there was a lot of lights. So my mother said, this must be a nice town. We were surprised in the morning. There were no other houses, but just the home of Mr. Malbis. My mother told my daddy, what in the 7 heavens? You brought us here to starve my children? Well, every beginning for everybody. Because here I found 2 other little girls, Nafsika and Antigone. So I had somebody to play with, and so it wasn't bad for me.
Nafsika Mallers and Antigone Papageorge were orphans. Nafsi being orphaned because of her mother dying early. Her father was an import-export guy from Chicago and was a big investor in the plantation. He felt like he couldn't raise her by himself in Chicago, so he left her, of course, here. Antigone was adopted by the Papageorge family. It is not clear exactly her origin. Marie Starkey became their primary caretaker. She was a school teacher from North Dakota. She came to the school system here. The superintendent knew the family here, the Greek colony, and they took her in as a boarder at first, and then later, because of her skills in English, became the secretary for Jason. She liked the environment here and stayed on and became the manager, I guess you could say, of the house.
They all spoke mostly Greek. So until they began mixing and mingling and learning the language, everyone just stayed together.
It was like a large family. They had a lot of hardships. I'm sure there were some misunderstandings the way these people lived.
That dining room, we had a dining room full of men that everybody would work here, ate dinner here, and that place would be full of men. Nobody married.
Whether there was any rule against marriage or not, I don't know. I've always heard it said that Mr. Malbis felt that you couldn't devote your time to the Lord and Christ if your interests were divided too much.
Jason Malbis was a very religious man. Certainly it was not a monastery, but there was certainly that flavor to the community and that devotion to God.
These immigrants that were single men that came over, they weren't discouraged on getting married, but at the same time, if you did get married, you wouldn't be part of the group. You wouldn't have that security blanket, if you will. If you stayed in the family, you would be taken care of. You might get a modest nominal salary, but all of your other needs would be met.
You go to the doctor, you just charge it, and at the end of the month, they'll send the doctor a check.
It was kind of a subtle incentive, or not so subtle maybe, to stay with the group.
But when they married, they were not basically considered to be in the family, so to speak.
It always is strange for everybody to actually understand how could so many people work together and have no difficulties. We can't always have things the way we want them. And so we have to agree with the other person's ideas as well as mine.
Well, I guess they loved one another. You know, together you stand and apart you fall, and Mr. Malbis kept them all together, and they stayed together. My father was a good friend of Mr. Malbis. Mr. Malbis, he did a little of everything. That road right there wasn't like it is now. It was a mud hole. And I think I pulled out enough cars one day to buy me a blue serge suit. My daddy and Mr. Malbis cleared this road all the way past where I lived down here through the swamp.
They started the nursery, dairy, turpentine, timber.
Sheep, goats, a huge barn.
They had a canning factory.
The canning factory was the first enterprise that they launched into.
3 buildings were built for the cannery. It was a large operation.
Vegetables packed in a European style were then sold to markets in Chicago and New York. Next was the sawmill. Like everything else, out of the necessity for that enterprise, the timber to build buildings.
They put the first electricity in Baldwin County. We was used to a lantern, and when we got electric lights, it was so bright you couldn't hardly see it. Well, we used to that much light.
They kind of taught themselves to manufacture electricity through steam. This building was erected in 1922 or 3. Most of it built by the brick that they made here. Cement molds created these large bricks that you see here on the wall. After the electric plant was up and going, they saw the need for ice, especially to refrigerate their own food. So this addition to this building is what we call the ice plant. This room in particular was where they cut the ice on this conveyor belt, shaped it into different sizes by the order that people requested, and then it was delivered on horse and buggy. These rooms, of course, were insulated with cork, as you can see. Then it was covered in plaster. All of this was built by the old-timers, and it's remarkable because they didn't know anything about engineering necessarily, and of course the architecture too is very Greek primitive, I guess you could say, such as these shapes of these windows, and this door too is pretty fascinating. They made it to accommodate the ice blocks. Like everything here, it was so utilitarian that you have that form follows function idea. We're in the refrigeration room. We even have some examples of the refrigeration plumbing that existed. This was probably the third enterprise that the founders undertook to make money and also serve themselves, which lent itself to really creating a self-sufficient community.
All that was done in order to occupy the people they brought from Greece. and not to be a burden to this country.
I was born in Mississippi, Sugar Lock, Mississippi. My mama moved here in Alabama. Because I had 2 children. My husband was dead. I had one baby walking when he died, and the other baby wasn't walking. And I had to work. But they was nice. Wasn't too much money in the job, but I lived all right.
You go to work at 3 o'clock in the morning time. You get finished up about 6:30, 7 o'clock. You go home, you take 2 hours rest, come back to the dairy, you get your truck and stuff, a wheelbarrow, and then you go down here to the silo and go to get your silo, digging out that silo, getting it. And then you go to the feed house and sack your feed for them. It was fun. A lot of work was in it, but it was fun. We enjoyed it.
They didn't live like rich people. They lived like poor folks. So many days we'd have beans and bread for dinner.
And we would get called to lunch or supper by dinner bell. And there was a pump outside that you would prime.
And Mr. Malbis participated in everything. For them to see that he was able to do whatever was there.
Jason Malbis did live in a dorm room just like all the other members of the Malbis Plantation.
All the Greek people, they, men's and the women, they would get $25 a month. That was their allowance.
They was not here for the accumulation of riches, but to work and do without, as they did.
My grandmother had gotten settled over here. She arranged for this family in Greece that had my mother to marry my father, whose name was Evstratios, and we moved to Mobile, Alabama, because he was working at the Metropolitan Restaurant at the time. Life was, as a child, was very free and very good. I think of the sawmills, the dairy, and the cows and the horses, the cemetery that we would go to as children and walk from the house to the cemetery and eat the fruit along the way.
Auntie would take me to New Orleans when I was 10 years old and give me $10, and I'd go to every movie house on Canal Street while she went shopping.
Greek flags next to the American flags on the 4th of July.
Of course, they spoke Greek. They cooked Greek food.
We would kill like 4 lambs on the weekend and have a feast. I ain't never had no lamb taste like that. Didn't know what lamb was for.
The aunts and uncles, they were very much willing to put some Greek folk music on, and we danced, aunts and uncles and children together.
Gulf Shores was the place to go to weekends and spend the day and swim, sometimes go early, make breakfast out there.
Uncle Philip would say, well, y'all better be ready by 5 o'clock Sunday because we're going to go fishing. We would take a picnic basket full of fried chicken and bread and Greek olives and feta cheese.
Some people came here, left, learned the language. Came here, learned the language, learned the trade, and left. Quite a few did that.
Pete Malbis delivered ice. He was the main, cat trying to sell. But his wife run off and left with them children. They took them children, George and Tommy, and raised them here.
I had what I considered, I had 12 grandparents and 12 grandmothers. They all raised me. My brother was 5 years older than me, and he jumped on a train one night. I guess he was about 12 or 13 years old, and went to Texas. We were both in Mobile, and we'd go to school. Had to go all the way down to Government Street, go to Greek school at 6 o'clock at night.
The only thing they were allowed to read was the good book and their school lessons.
Over here, you had cows, you messed around with all the uncles. In Mobile, you was nothing to do other than go to school.
George just left.
I was born in '58, was raised here, went to school here. This part of the plantation is what was known as the sheep pen. Sheep and also goats were raised here. Sheep and goats are a big part of the agricultural lifestyle of the Greek people. Not only were they sheared for the wool, but of course they ate them as well for Easter dinner and on and on. And here is part of the sheep pen, mostly used for the baby sheep to raise them and protect them. I think this was probably built in the 30s, and of course, again, with their self-taught knowledge, this wood was cut at the sawmill here, and it's all probably heart pine from the early pine trees. As it stayed abandoned, my cousins Helen, Pam, and Nafsi and I played in here on endless days of just pretending we were sheep farmers and making ink out of the berries and playing ink factory, and it's really stayed as one of my favorite buildings on the place.
I don't know what the population of the, quote, Malbis family was at its peak. My guess is it was 70, 75 people.
Uncle Perry worked at the Communal Hotel with Manoli Lambrakis, his busboys, waiters, whatever. Mr. Malbis or William Papageorge must have been in New Orleans, found these Greek guys there and told them that they were building or had a little Greek community going on in Daphne, Alabama.
A lot of people say that Jason was real intuitive in seeing what potential people had, or at least cultivating their interest a little bit. The main story was Manuel Lambrakis and his interest in the nursery business.
The nursery was one of the more successful businesses. It was started in 1927, I believe.
The nursery exported from here camellias and azaleas and grafted many varieties that are registered with names of the people here and some of the favorite customers Mr. Lambrakis had.
It was 200 acres. Probably had 5 or 6 60-foot long greenhouses.
There probably wasn't a nursery in this part of the country that could touch this place. I mean, it was a fine nursery.
Well, it always amazed a lot of people, and of course me too, but it was a community that just had built everything in it. You know, they had electricity, they had water, they had ice, they had dairy.
In the 20s, after the causeway was built and had access to Mobile, they built the bakery.
There was a little bakery right outside where the ice plant is.
I carried it to Mobile by boat.
And then the next thing I know is that we opened the bakery in Mobile, Alabama.
That was by far their biggest commercial venture. At its height, and I'm talking about in the 40s and early 50s, you know, my guess is that Malbis Bakery hired 200 or 300 people. They built a fantastic building down there. They delivered by truck all over, you know, southwest Alabama, over into Mississippi, northwest Florida. A very prominent Mobile family owned a competing bakery, a very successful bakery. And I think they were always a little jealous of the Malbis competition.
You know, at first I think there was some territorial issues of these Greek guys that are coming into our marketplace.
There was terrible rivalry. Who was going to get the coffee cakes out? Who was going to get this type of coffee roll out?
You had to watch what you was doing. I came in one morning and one of Smith's men that worked the place, I caught him punching holes with a pencil in my pound cakes. They were easy to run. So I went over on the Smith shelf and I pulled everything down off of it and threw it on the floor.
What a lovely girl. Pearly teeth, soft skin, beautiful hair. Of course she's popular. Just as popular as the Malbis milk loaf bread she eats at every meal.
You couldn't buy finer bread if you were a millionaire. Remember, the Malbis milk loaf is made with 100% pure milk. No water, no substitute. Try Malbis milk loaf bread tomorrow. Fast delivery trucks rush to your grocer daily.
It costs no more.
as I got older, my father, because he did not want us mixing with boys, men, would only allow us to work at Malbis Bakery, because the office at that time was usually the uncles and Auntie and Nafshi.
At that time, we're talking about people that were 18 and 19 years old, not at my age, 5 or 6 years old. The only strictness was about it, you had to take a bath and behave, and that was about all I knew. Yeah, they had their rules when you got up in age. They didn't want you to date. It was two uncles that kind of laid the rules down, and that was the way they were.
Most of them all were from villages in Greece, and they didn't change their ways. They still live with those teachings, those thoughts, that way of doing things.
The way they based their morals was from the, Greece in the teens and the 20s and the, whatever, and the U.S. in those years too. And so that's how they kept their line.
The door was always open. When you had enough, you could take off.
3 of them, Antigone, Nafsika, and Bessie, they sent them to, back then it was Visitation Academy in Mobile, the Catholic girls' boarding school.
There was not any gambling, there was no dancing. There was music, there was education, there was, you wore gloves when you went out, you didn't chew gum.
It wasn't too sinful, folks, I can tell you that. They was church folks.
Once a week, all the uncles and we, the children and the aunts, who we called our aunts, would all sit here at this table, usually on a Friday night. We followed passages from the Bible in a series as we went along. We children read in Greek.
They also were, culturally minded. They played music. One of the men, I think, wrote plays, and they all acted in them. They were real proud of their ethnic background and their legacy, and they did want to maintain their culture.
I think because he was a religious man, he wanted to build a community where people had a lot of faith and wanted to do good for their fellow man and to strive to be better people.
They seemed to have all the things they needed. They worked together. They enjoyed working. They were always pleasant. They were always happy. The fact that they lived as a family, how they made it work, I don't know. I just know it was a great operation and it was successful.
My understanding is that Mr. Malbis left the States about 1936, and he went back to Greece.
I think he intended to come back. He communicated a lot with the group while he was there.
He got trapped by the German occupation of Greece.
It was a very hard life with the German occupation.
In Athens, people were starving because they didn't have some place to plant food.
They had curfew, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, as soon as you got to, you have to stay home.
He had an olive oil refinery. He would send my mother on excursions on the train. He would give her cigarettes to give to the Germans to bribe them so they would let her go, and she would deliver olive oil to soothe their stomach with what little they had to eat.
He was helping people there, and encouraged these folks here to send money, send aid. Didn't foresee that he was ill himself. He developed colon cancer. His opportunity to get back and take care of that here didn't exist, so he ended up dying there. Maybe in one way he wanted to get back to his homeland and die there.
I would tend to say that that was a loss. And I don't know that it really was ever really filled. And be like a driving force that's diminished, maybe not entirely gone, but diminished.
After Mr. Malbis deceased, I mean, things were carried on the same. The thing is that there was no jealousy or I am better than you. That didn't exist.
In the letters that he wrote back, there's a lot of talk of please try to see each other as brothers, to discourage them from dissension among them. But he was such a strong leader. I believe his absence left everybody looking at each other saying, well, who's going to be in charge?
I think everyone tried very, very hard to fulfill his dreams.
For years, they would talk about Mr. Malbis like he was seated at the dinner table. I mean, he had a tremendous influence on them.
They all seemed to still stay together and move along in the direction of keeping the status quo, but they invested in trying to contact people such as my parents to come in the early 50s. My parents came over in 1952 with my two sisters and brother.
I still remember the Statue of Liberty. It was awesome. We drove up right in front of this, what we call the big house, or the pink house. It was always painted pink. All the uncles were out front, and they were just grabbing my mother and kissing her and hugging her because they knew so much of her. And Jason Malbis was my mother's uncle. I, being 9 years old, was like, I don't know if I like this.
My father's two brothers is in a family. They told me if I like to come to the United States, to come to Malbis Plantation. So I say, okay, go ahead.
I was 5, 6 years old, and we have no food to eat and no place to stay. And my uncle was here. And then during the time when I was to the army camps with a little tent and begged for the leftovers, I decided to communicate with my uncle Tom here and ask him if he could please take me to America.
My mother's brother was a part of Malbis, and we asked that he help us with. My father was taken a prisoner of war, and when he came back, our finances were, the country was bankrupt, essentially, Greece was. And my uncle offered to help me with my education, to go to the University of Alabama. So I came in the early 50s.
A few years after my family arrived, there were young people that were brought over to live here and to, in my understanding, to take over and follow in the footsteps of those that started it.
I remember hearing that they were going to bring, a group of young people over, probably because they, foresaw that at some point they were going to be needed.
Once the older folks realized one of the flaws of not getting married is not leaving behind any heirs, they didn't have anybody to take over some of the businesses. At the electric plant, the parts were harder and harder to get. The people running that had not groomed or educated anybody to succeed them, so when they got too old to run it, it just closed.
They brought a number of young people from Greece over. The idea of working them into the various businesses, bakery being the largest one.
Constantine Papageorge, the man in charge after Jason's death, went to Greece.
And he interviewed young men and women. They were really very young, like 18 to 25.
I don't know if he handpicked them or he knew these families and just said, there's an opportunity. Everybody was still looking for opportunity here in the West.
Frank Boykin was then the congressman from this, well-known congressman from this district in Alabama, and his help was solicited. And anyhow, they worked out a deal to where all these people came over.
Came over. This was still a very rural and agrarian lifestyle, and some of them were from Athens, more of a city.
I guess they were put under the sort of the strict work rules. The Malbis expected them to work hard and maybe not to play too much. I don't know.
Accommodations were modest and lifestyle being strict. By then, the gentlemen in charge of them were older, and they kind of clashed instead of, embraced.
If you not be a parent or live with the brothers and sisters, you don't quite understand the way the young people feel.
They wanted to work their 8 hours and be free to go to movies, to date, to go to dances, and they didn't want them to.
The people that belonged to the plantation, the older ones, had come to a country that only paid them, 5 cents? For a job of a day long. They were used to hard times, hard work, no recreation.
You're not expected to marry. You're expected to work. You're expected to, be a part of the family life and the religious life at Malbis. That may have been too confining.
They didn't know what was going on in the world or modernization or anything. They just didn't know.
I think they kind of stonewalled themselves with maybe not even realizing it.
The expectation here was to experience life as they had experienced it and to continue living in the way they lived.
They wanted to have a meeting with me about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They said, well, Maria, in this place you will live as we have lived. In this place you will be restricted for certain activity such as dances, social things that we don't approve of. You must do is what we tell you. I think that's about all I could take at that point.
Even when I came back out of service, we made $25 a month. And that was it. And some of those people thought just because they got to America is a land of honey, it's supposed to be $500 a week and a brand new automobile.
They were all grateful to have been brought to this country, because Greece at that time, right after the war, was not in real good shape. But they left.
I think there were only one or two that stayed. There's one lady here, Eugenia Eftaxa. She was in that group.
My mama said, my child, where you go? You have half body. Okay? Americans have strong people to work. Where you go, you? My body, 82 pounds. Skeleton, gray, yellow. Everybody is to me like another people. Allah is good to me, love, give me happy, everyone. Sometimes have a dance or sing, I like to sing all the time. My uncle say, sing this, is good for me. Σιγά σιγά κι αυτό το βράδυ στα σκαλοπάτια σου για λίγο θα σταθώ. Σιγά σιγά μες στο σκοτάδι ένα παράπονο της νύχτας θα σου πω. Μη μου κρατάς κλειστή την πόρτα, βρέχει ο Θεός και θα βραχώ. Άνοιξ' αγάπη μου σαν πρώτα, να μπω κι εγώ να ζεσταθώ.
One by one, they gone away. California, some going to Chicago, New York, all over, get married.
When that happened, it discouraged Malbis because they didn't have the young people to take over and so forth. And I think that's largely why they sold the bakery, because these people came and left.
Clearly, by the time they got older, by the time they got these young people and lost them, and they saw, what we're doing isn't working. but they didn't know what to do, really.
Jason Malbis had wished for a school to be here, a hospital. He wanted progress, and there was still time for progress. The bakery was sold. They were living here full time. The house here was remodeled to suit their needs.
When the bakery sold, they got into small service industry like the gas station and the restaurant and the motel.
Well, it was a nice service station, and it had a bay in the back there where they had a mechanic. Mr. Nick was up front taking the money.
I remember the old wooden restaurant and hotel they had across the street there. You know, you didn't have one between here and Pensacola, Florida.
They had quite a hard time to get the Highway 90.
They owned, the land in this area. They owned about 6,000 acres. So knowing that the road was going to be going through somewhere, Highway 90 being the first, I believe, the folks were instrumental in assisting the highway department, even in clearing the land and helping with the road.
We had many dinners, many entertaining people. Had the governor of Alabama here. He helped us an awful lot, and so many people.
Highway 90 was real viable. The motel was just your typical 50s style. Full service, linen, flowers on the table. They had those little things that you turn upside down that moo, and they were still getting bread and fresh products from the farm to use in the restaurant, so it was very successful. Some of the state-of-the-art features that we carried at the motel to accommodate our guests were things like teletrip. You could dial in here the city that you were traveling to from this spot, how many miles it takes to get there, the highway routes, and where you might be able to stop along the way.
There used not to be but 2 restaurants around this area.
I actually had to manage it just for a few years. They more or less gave me the keys and said, this is the front door, and here's the cash register, and here's the back door. I had one waitress, Thelma, did not know that when you ask, how are you, is rhetorical. So she would go on to tell the customer she had stomach trouble that day and her back was hurting. And when the interstate came through, we didn't have the traffic. I couldn't encourage my folks to put money into it to rehab it. So we closed it. All those businesses started losing money, and the old timers, one for a need for something to do, and also to just not admit that they're failing, kept them open. And they just kind of kept on trying to maintain until they could come up with an answer. And they were kind of looking for guidance, I guess. But there was nobody to compare to Jason Malbis and his type of guidance.
We children had a choice to maybe take the places of Auntie Papageorge and Nancy Mallers and not marry, and maybe somehow continue in some manner part of this, what could be salvaged. We were free to choose, so we chose marriage.
I was attracted to the other life, the other world, and being involved in that life, and to be able to participate and enjoy, be part of, to a larger degree than I was able to by being part of this commune. There was a plan for me to go to Auburn University to study horticulture, to return to Malbis and take over running the nursery. I enjoyed the experience of going to school. I enjoyed the experience of being away from the plantation. Before I knew it, Uncle Sam was knocking on my door. Vietnam was going on. I chose to enlist and to go serve in Vietnam. Came back, decided that Malbis Plantation was not the place where I wanted to spend the rest of my life.
This was a fine nursery, and Mr. Lambrakis just got kind of tired, and he just made the decision that he wasn't going to do it anymore.
I think, or wish that in looking back, that I had gone on and completed the goal of coming back and running the nursery. My personal preference is seeing the land as natural as possible and to use it for growing living things rather than pavement.
Well, I was in the hospital during the time the David went down. We wasn't milking nothing, we just had it for a storage place. Electricity was bad on it. They told me after it happened that they kept hearing something popping all night that night. And that morning about 2 o'clock, it just lit up in a blaze.
As all the men died and kind of disappeared, the women that were left behind took over, and the timing of real estate kind of became something that could keep them going, and so a lot of the lands were sold and developed.
I miss the quiet. I moved to New Orleans and it was concrete and steel and barren. And I would come, you know, as a married person, I would come and walk out here and there were tears in my eyes because it was just green and the trees were there and nature was here, and you could pick up the violets and you could walk down to the creek. And I didn't realize until I became an adult how much I gleaned from becoming morally the human being that I hope I am.
They was nice. I worked for them and raised my children. My girl went to college. Miss Auntie always looked out for. When their school time come, they bought all my children school clothes, you know. They were church peoples. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
As they got older, they came to the realization that it's over.
Today, of course, we do have a church that's remarkable in architecture and artwork. When Jason died, his last letter expressed, "I hope you continued and build the church."
Mr. Gus Papageorge spearheaded the building of the church. Most of the churches in Greece are quite large and elaborate.
They literally copied a church in Greece and then brought material from Greece to build it here. Imported the artist and his apprentices to paint it. The scale that they actually did build the church on maybe was influenced by the sale of the bakery. Probably was.
The businesses died down, but the church would always stand to keep something forever in the memory of Jason Malbis. The dream will never be over because Malbis Memorial Foundation will always help mankind.
The success of Malbis, or the importance of Malbis, I think is just found in the nature of people that have a common purpose, a common goal, and are virtually self-taught people that seem to achieve something greater by doing it collectively.
I I've often wondered what all these people put together through a lot of hard labor, and it was like each one of them had a child, and they nurtured this child, like Uncle Steve nurtured the dairy, and Uncle Emmanuel had the nursery, and, you know, worked and put their lives into it, and then just faded away.
I think that's really the importance of documenting this, is that it was a typical immigration story. They had overcome so many obstacles that it was a testament to their faith and how proud they were of how far they had come.